Okay, let me welcome everyone to, are you still letting people in? Because I can hear it.
Yes, we are. I will mute it.
Please. Okay, let me welcome everyone to today's session. It is the 4th. Sorry, can we just wait a minute while they mute that? Okay, I think we can now start uninterrupted. So let me welcome everyone to the Middle East Institute's 101 ME101 series. This is session 4. As you know, for the last 2 sessions, the second session looked at the Gulf states because we are considering the geopolitics of the Middle East region. We looked first at the Gulf states. Last week, we considered the case of Turkey and Iran and Russia as an external player. I think we cannot talk about the Middle East and external players without looking at the role of China. And next week, we will look at the role of the United States. Looking at China, I'd say a few things. One, if you look at how their presence in the Middle East in the last decade, you can see that they have increased their economic and political reach. The relationship does not revolve exclusively around energy. There are other economic interests, and you can see this in the Belt and Road Initiative, which was intended to increase trade, communication, and infrastructure development. But Beijing is very careful about getting entangled in the Middle East and North Africa. They have seen the problems that the United States has faced, that the United Kingdom has faced, that even Russia has faced. They've seen the problems that Turkey has also faced, right? Now, there's been a lot of debate, and we can look at this again next week, about the United States' presence and its security umbrella, which is shifting. That doesn't mean to say that China would be eager to increase its security footprint. I mean, I think honestly, its goal is to support the status quo. Thus, you can see in the region that the Chinese approach is very much a cautious approach. And a lot of the driver is economics driven. It's not just about getting the resources, it is also about exporting Chinese technology and knowledge, right? So let me now hand over to our speaker today. Dr. Alessandro Arduino is a principal research fellow at the Middle East Institute, and is also the co-director of the Security and Crisis Management International Center at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. He's a former diplomat, speaks Mandarin fluently, has 2 decades of experience in China, and this has encompassed security analysis and crisis management. His main research interests include China, Central Asia, the China, Central and Middle East and North Africa relations, sovereign wealth funds, private military security companies, and China's security and foreign policy. He's the author of several books, having published both in, well, not just both. He has published in Italian, in English, and in Mandarin, and his most recent book is China's Private Army, Protecting the New Silk Road. So before I hand over to Alex, let me just set down the ground rules. We have muted everyone, and we ask you to keep your cameras off because the focus should really be on the speaker. Alex will speak for about 40 minutes, after which we will unmute everyone so that you may ask your questions. You have 2 options. My preferred option is that you raise your hand so that I can identify you and put you into the queue. When you actually are called, it would be good if you could turn on your camera so that Alex can actually see who he's speaking with. And when you do ask your question, before you do that, introduce yourself. Okay? So for now, you all are on mute, and we ask you to keep your cameras off. Let me hand over now to Alex. Take over, Alex, the floor is yours.
Michelle, thank you very much for the 2 kind introduction. I will just start talking about China in the Middle East, starting where you were mentioning China is interested in preserving the status quo. First of all, let's say, what's the point of the relationship about China and the Middle East? If we are looking at the last 10 years, and by Middle East, I would like to encompass MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. China has progressively increased its economic and political footprint in the region. Security is still yet to be seen and yet to come. In the West, and especially in the last few years, when we have been witnessing a shift in the security architecture of the Middle East, with the United States repositioning its military forces, there has been a lot of call looking at China and considering China an unwilling security provider, or even a provider of security that cannot reach the same level proposed by the United States. But if we look at the academic output in mainland China, the discourse in the last few years is not much different. Most of the Chinese academicians, they underline basically two things relating to the Middle East. To avoid China entangling in the Middle East quagmire, and even if it refers to other area nearby, like Afghanistan, avoiding China getting into the so-called graveyard of empires. Preserving the status quo is not going to be easy, as the challenge in the Middle East are increasing, not only related to the above mentioned change in the security architecture, but also to the economic problem that we are going to see increasing in the future due to the fall of oil prices and to COVID-19. Saying that, I would like to repeat myself a lot of time during this presentation, underline one thing. What China is still striving to achieve in the Middle East, let's say, is a kind of balancing act. What does it mean that? China is trying to enact a strategy in one country that doesn't create friction or create problem with the other country. Let's say is one of the few countries, probably the only one, who is managing relation with Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, and at the same time trying to avoid greater friction with the United States. Middle East has not to be taken in a vacuum, but there is a strong geographical link that connect China with the region. And it's not only with North Africa, it's also with the Horn of Africa, with South Asia, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and with even Central Asia. And all this connection basically is related to the 2013 Belt and Road Initiative. What is the Belt and Road Initiative? In a nutshell, President Xi Jinping in 2013 presented in Kazakhstan at the Nazarbayev University this vision of economic investment, trade, and improving connection between regions. The Middle East, it's very important. That's the reason why since 2013, there has been a profound increase of Chinese direct investment in port, highway, railway, but also the Middle East is still very important for China for one main reason, and it's China energy security. In early 90s, if I recall correct, 1993, China became a net importer of energy. And the Middle East nowadays, just in this year, offer 40% of oil, crude oil to China, 20% of gas. And it's quite important for Chinese energy security. Of course, China has already a plan B and plan C in action in order to diversify its own energy footprint, not only to be linked with the Middle East, but also from the pure oil point of view, the oil output from Saudi Arabia, from Iran, are quite essential, even in a post-COVID situation. Having said that, what are the trajectory of Chinese foreign policy? China foreign policy is still anchored to the decade-old 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. One of the most important in these 5 principles is the principle of non-interference. And this means, as we just mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, is the fact that China is not interested to change the status quo. BRI try to present and enhance regional integration. But then again, as I said before, China is always trying to strike a balancing act to the fact that is recognized by the Middle East country as a very important economic partner, but at the same time, the Middle East country recognize the fact that China cannot offer the kind of security partnership that the United States are offering. One of the problems, in my personal opinion, that I always witness looking at the interaction, not only in the Middle East, but also in the other area with the Belt and Road, is the fact that several countries have different perception and expectation about what China is going to offer. And of course, especially after COVID-19 impact on Chinese economy, we still have to question how much of the proposed Belt and Road is going to be enacted in the year to come. Quite important for the Middle East is the fact that China proposed a development model that is not related to a democratic development. China is looking at a model that promotes development with economic investment at the core of its foreign policy. So basically, we can summarize that China foreign policy now in the Middle East and along the Belt and Road is an investment-centric approach to foreign policy. Very pragmatical, but if we look at Chinese history with the Middle East, is not been the case. And this is not been the case for quite a while. I would like now to use some minute of this presentation just to underline that Chinese relations with the Middle East are not only related to energy and to economics of the last 10 years, but also China has a profound interaction with the area. Now is not the place nor the time to talk about the relation between the Chinese Empire and the Persian Empire. But if we just look at the beginning, in 1949, the relation with the MENA region, especially with North Africa, and quite marginal with the Middle East, it was not related to economic partnership. At that time, even considering the fact that we were getting into the Cold War, and then there were 2 very clear sides, and China was siding with the Soviet Union, at that time, China relationship with the Middle East was related to struggle against imperialism and against colonialism, and it was very ideological. So if we want to segment the historical development of the People's Republic of China interaction with the Middle East, we can divide it basically in three segments. The first one, 1949, 1979, and 1979 is quite important data to remember. As I mentioned, it was basically a struggle against imperialism. But this support for militia and for government, for example, at the time, China was very active in supporting in Algeria the FLN movement, Front de Libération Nationale. It was quite near to Egypt with the policy of Pan-Arabism enacted by Gamal Nasser. And even at the end of the 70s, was active in supporting in Oman the Dhofari Marxist revolutionary group. And this relationship with Marxist militia all over the Gulf and in North Africa poisoned for many years the relationship with the Gulf monarchies. Of course, in the 50s until the 70s, China was perceiving Gulf monarchies as still a result of colonialism, but then this started to change. The second part, historical part of the relation between China and the Middle East can be set in a date from, let's say, 1979 to 2012. So we have all the time as in China from Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao. And during the time, there's been a change that basically framed the future relation of China with the Middle East. In China, being more cautious and being more selective in the support and the participation. For example, an interesting moment can be seen from the beginning of the Iraq-Iran war in the 80s, in which China was providing weapons to both sides of the battlefield, and not as the case, for example, for Algeria, that was giving hardware and training for free, but this time it was just a commercial enterprise. At the same time, as I mentioned before, there was still quite profound distrust between the Gulf monarchies and the People's Republic of China. But after 1979, both during the Iraq War and then in the 80s and in the 79, with the rise of theocracy in Iran with the Islamic Revolution, the Gulf started to look at the People's Republic of China in a different way. For example, in the 1980s, during the Iraq-Iran war, both countries, they were using Soviet Scud missile. And Saudi Arabia was looking at this missile flying over and over and basically was trying to acquire a deterrence from the United States. At the time, if I recall correct, the long-range missile, mid-range missile was the Persian. But Israel was not, let's say, willing to have Saudi Arabia acquire that kind of advanced military technology. So under the radar, Saudi Arabia started to have a talk in terms of military exchange with the People's Republic of China. And this change led to acquiring by Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of several Dongfang ballistic missiles. If I recall correctly, it was Model 3 that up to now has been upgraded until Model 21. And still in these days, China-Saudi Arabia relation that changed, that improved, that are getting better, is still related as a kind of bargaining chip. If Saudi Arabia is not able to acquire military technology from the United States, then China is a willing provider for this technology. And that's specifically during this year the case of combat unmanned aerial vehicle. If you move to the third part of the historical evolution of the relationship between China and the Middle East, is from 2012 up to now. 2013, as I mentioned before, was the incipit of the Belt and Road Initiative, and then progressively China inroad into the Middle East started to be not only related to energy, but to trade. China is one of the main trade partners of all the countries in the region. And then investment in infrastructure, investment in railroad, in connection, in the energy sector. China is already talking with Saudi Arabia for to provide a nuclear reactor. It has been a nuclear reactor provider for Iran for a certain amount of time. But as I mentioned before, all these actions are balanced not only between China and the Middle East, Iran, Gulf country, and Israel, but especially to the perception that the United States have in China relation with the Middle East. If you want to look more deeper in what are going to be the trajectory of this economic relation, I strongly advise you to take a look at the China-Arab white paper. It's a policy paper presented in 2016 and basically summarize what I was mentioning before as a balancing act. During the presentation of the paper, Chinese Foreign Affairs Minister Wang Yi mentioned that the turmoil in the Middle East is rooted in lack of development, economic development, and then economic development is the cure for the crisis. Of course, we can mention also that you can have economic development if you have security in an area. Without security, then it will be really difficult to enact any kind of this kind of development. But in Chinese foreign policy, as I mentioned before, one of the pillars is the principle of non-interference. And basically, this principle is still here, but is slowly changing. Is slowly adapting to the fact that China is increasing its economic footprint. There are, I think, more than 1 million of Chinese workers in all over the MENA region. And as already happened in the 2011 in Libya, for example, China had to exfiltrate very fast its own national during the collapse of Muammar Gaddafi regime. As mentioned before, China is aiming to have a kind of developmental peace, not a democratic peace. And in some respect, it can play quite well in the Middle East, as there are no strings attached related to reform and the democratic process. The only problem from the United States arising for the BRI is that the BRI is increasing in the Middle East is the footprint. This footprint is not only economical, it can be political. Besides the fact that up to now, China still denies that the BRI, the initiative, is a strategic plan. It's just an initiative, but then we can have a long talk about this. What is worrying the United States is that the BRI is creating an economic trade network that is linking different regions, and this network is outside the control of the United States. As I mentioned before, this balancing act is not only China's own balance act, but also the Middle East country, that they are trying to balance China's greater capacity to invest, especially in a post-COVID-19 economic situation. But this balance of great capacity to invest is also linked to the fact that China has a severe limitation as a security provider. In this respect now, I would like just to give 3 brief examples how this is working, looking at 3 areas. First area is the relationship between China and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, then moving to the one between China and Israel, and then shifting briefly with China and Iran. And then after, I would like to have the floor open and to interact with you with your question and answer. Mentioned at the beginning, the foundation of the relationship with China and the Gulf countries, especially with Saudi Arabia, is in energy. I think just this year is the 30th year of the establishment of the diplomatic relation between the Kingdom and the People's Republic of China. This is quite important because we can see that there was almost 40 years before the 2 countries recognized each other. As I mentioned, first part, 1949, 1979, there is a profound distrust, especially for the Chinese support to post-colonial struggle, and in the Gulf, in Oman, with the Dhofari insurrection. But then slowly, the relationship from marginal become comprehensive, and from comprehensive become a comprehensive strategic partnership. I have to underline the fact that since 1982, China doesn't have allegiance with other countries, but have economic partnership. The highest level of economic partnership is a comprehensive strategic economic partnership. And it's quite interesting because the time, and if I recall, was 2016, in which China signed the comprehensive partnership with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, just after President Xi Jinping terminated his trip in Saudi Arabia, he moved to Tehran, signing the same comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran, balancing these 2 across the Gulf. And up to now, both countries are trying to make China, to force China to take a stance from one side or the other, but Chinese economic power still enable the country to be a balancing actor and to be in the middle. But as mentioned before, if we look at contemporary relation with Saudi Arabia, energy, yes, it's very important, but China also is the most important trade partner, a very important partner for investment. And then the Chinese investment policy with the Saudi Arabia economy have a lot of overlapping. There is a quite important complementarity to the fact that the BRI promote investment and the Saudi have launched the Saudi Vision 2030. So there is a synergy in acquiring Chinese technology and utilizing joint fund to invest abroad. Saudi have been allowed to invest in the downstream sector of oil refining in China. And this not only now, it happened, if I recall correct, during the visit of King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz in Beijing in 2006. And then, of course, China is interested in a good relationship with Saudi, also in a matter of soft power, for the Saudi prominence in the global Islam. Having said that, during, for example, King Abdullah visit in Beijing and this increased rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and the People's Republic of China, we don't have to forget that it was a time in which the United States, with George W. Bush, were looking at a kind of democratic process in the Middle East. So this was also a signal from Saudi Arabia to the US ally that China could be an option. So as I mentioned, balancing act not only from China, but also from the Middle East country that can use China as a bargaining chip to obtain more or to obtain better from the United States. The case of the combat drone is not an isolated case, as Saudi Arabia, like UAE, has been looking for quite a long time to acquire Predator and Reaper US very high-tech drone, but instead they opted for the Winlong and the new model Caihong that has been going to be produced in Saudi Arabia and sold in other countries, nearby countries, from Egypt to Jordania. Quite important is with Saudi Arabia is not only the fact that China have a comprehensive strategic partnership, but China also launched a very high level discussion and joint mechanism to provide new kind of joint investment and perspective. And the leader from the Saudi Arabia part of this joint investment and joint high-level group is Mohammed bin Salman himself. Having said that, shifting the perspective from Saudi Arabia to Israel, the story is quite similar. But we are not talking about energy as a pillar. Israel was quite late to recognize diplomatically in China, as it happened with Saudi Arabia, but it doesn't mean that there was no relationship before. There was a strong relationship before 1992, the date in which Israel recognized diplomatic relation with the People's Republic of China. And at the time, it was a relationship based on transfer of military technology from Israel to China. We don't have to discount, historically speaking, that Chinese have a quite good perception of the Jewish culture, and there is an important soft power that play in this respect. But at the time, in the 80s until 90s and later on, China recognized Israel as a key player, security player in the Middle East, and Israeli technology has been a quite important driver in the relationship between the two countries up to now. Of course, this relationship has been always a triangular one because the United States are in the middle, and up to now they are pushing Israel to have even less economic relationship and accept less investment from the BRI in Israeli port, especially the one in Haifa. Israel started in 1979 to have informal ties with People's Republic of China. But the increase was not only in 92 during the formal diplomatic relation between the two parties, but in the transfer of military equipment, as I just mentioned. There was a quite strong halt that happened in the year 2000, in which the United States became very vocal in avoiding Israel delivering high-grade military equipment to China. And that was related essentially to two cases. The one of the Falcon early airborne radar system, and the second, it was a drone technology, the Harpy drone technology. But we can see that during the year, even after the year 2000 up to now, the economic relationship between China and Israel has been quite strong and has been growing. One tangible proof of this can be seen in 2015, when Israel immediately joined AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is bank led by the People's Republic of China, and the US strongly opposed to that, but Israel jumped in with several other countries. What is the relationship now, the main driver between the two countries? I think it can be well summarized by President, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he returned back to Israel after a trip in China in 2013. And Netanyahu mentioned that China is interested mainly in three things for China. The first thing is Israeli technology. The second thing is Israeli technology. And the third thing is Israeli technology. So in this startup nation, the so-called Silicon Wadi, there is a lot of overlapping and synergy with the Chinese desire that is quite well proponent in China, Made in China policy, Made in China 2025. The fact that China needs to increase research and development, industrial output, and Israel as a startup nation is one of the preferential partners in doing so. So to summarize, the core point of the cooperation between Israel and China are cooperation in acquiring advanced research and development technology from Israel, access to the Chinese market from the Israel side, acquiring top-notch technology, especially the one related to software, cyber defense, cyber technology. Of course, the geostrategical role of Israel that Israel have in the Middle East. And in terms of geographical space, Israel is also one of the pillars of the BRI if we look at the connection between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. As I mentioned before, one important part, even if it's not well documented most of the time, is the Jewish culture soft power that still have a long tradition in China. But these are the positive part. What are the constraints? And similar, there are several constraints in the relationship with Saudi Arabia and China. Mainly the constraint between China and Israel relationship are first and foremost the dual use export of technology that can have a civilian use or a military use. The increasing pressure from the year 2000 and especially now from the United States to de-link, to decouple from the economic embrace with the People's Republic of China. Then, of course, there is the Chinese position that it's also an economic partner with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, and the long-standing, since the 1949 position, in the 70s, position of China in favor of the Palestinian cause and the PLO. Having said that, there are even friction between the development of the BRI. Recently, there was a desalinization water plant that have to be acquired by the Chinese state-owned company and was denied the cell to China, and this kind of friction. But beside that, both countries are playing quite well their balancing act in the region and with the United States. I think so I will be basically more quick in dealing with the fact that still Iran is managing pretty well the relation with Iran. And it's quite interesting because, as I mentioned before, China has always been a very cautious balancing actor. But with Iran was not the case. Before 1979, China was increasing its investment and trade cooperation with Shah. And at the time, if I recall correct, in the early 60s, even Zhou Enlai had a visit in the country to increase the cooperation. But after 1979, thanks at the time to Premier Hua Guofang, China managed to shift very fast from the Shah to the Ayatollah Khamenei just reaching power, and then it started a quite long-standing relation with Iran. Again, it's an economic balanced relation that take into consideration the role of the United States. If you see that China still have the chance to acquire Iranian oil when the USA move out from the JCPOA, but decreased gradually acquiring oil from Iran, and at the same time increasing the buy from Saudi Arabia and even from Iraq. I'm sure everybody have been listening during the latest weeks about the MOU that surfaced between Iran and China. In my opinion, that MOU, especially all the media that has been growing up, media discourse around it, is basically making a mountain out of a molehill. What I say with that, it was nothing secret. It was an output of President Xi Jinping visit in 2016, at the time in which everybody were considering Iran a possible trade partner. We don't have to forget that it was a time in which there was a moderate government with Rouhani, President Obama in the United States, and then there was this idea that Iran would abide by the rule and there would be an opening. It was not the case, especially after the US moved out and increased the maximum pressure on sanction on Iran. But then what this MOU, at least what this note that surfaced out are telling us, that energy is still important, that China in the next 25 years is going to increase investment in rail, port, even in the subway. But an important part is going to be telecommunication, satellite, 5G. So Iran doesn't have many choice in choosing Huawei or not choosing Huawei, as the case of Israel and the case in the future of Saudi Arabia or UAE, for example. But having said that, it was not the fact that Iran was forced to gravitate to the economic lifeline given by the People's Republic of China. Mostly after the maximum pressure policy enacted by President Trump, Iran realized that Europe, the European Union, was no more an option. An interesting part is that in the MOU, military cooperation with Iran is mentioned, but definitely we are not going to see an Iranian-Chinese military axis, because still China is not interested in creating friction, more friction with Israel or even with Saudi or the UAE. On this respect, up to now, China is abiding to most of the sanctions. As I mentioned before, we can see in the number a collapse in the trade of oil between China and Iran, and a counter increase with Saudi and with Iraq. And I think that basically I'm around the 40 minutes that I was allowed to give my presentation. Just let me summarize basically what I said before. China principle of non-interference is there. It's going to change. It's not going to change fast. Several Chinese academicians are already promoting a kind of selective interference, of selective participation. But then again, China is not going to have partnerships that are rooted in common shared value, but are rooted in economic cooperation at the time. If we look, for example, of the relationship now between US and Saudi Arabia, again, we can see that it's a partnership that is not rooted in common shared value, but then the difference with China is that definitely the gap with China is quite narrow compared to the one with the United States. And with this, Michelle, I give you the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That's very interesting. I think what was interesting is to know is really the key point in all this, I think, is how does China find the balance between what are its interests and what inevitably could happen, that it cannot completely stay out of what it sees as a quagmire. I know that there have been policy papers written in Beijing with the government that have said that this is not the place to go into, but it is there is a market there, you know, and it is also a place where there is technology and resources that they are interested in. So with that, let me open the floor now for questions. If you could raise your hand, and then I will call you. We will also unmute you so that you can ask your question. I'd ask you to also turn on your camera. Do identify yourself when you actually address your question to Alessandro. Okay, Chen Wu, you can ask your question. Hao Chen, you can ask your question. Okay, go ahead and ask your question, please. You are on mute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
muted. So basically, my question is like,
Can I ask you where you are from?
I'm from Temasek Polytechnic.
Okay.
Yeah, so my question is like, I have two main questions. So my first question is that which particular cities in China has more trade with the Middle East? Yeah, that's one of my questions. And my second question is that also similar, what countries in the Middle East, particularly I'm more concerned about countries like Qatar, like UAE, these countries, how are their trade with China?
Okay, Hao Chen, thank you very much for your question. I didn't listen properly the first part, but if you're asking about the trade, China trade in the Middle East, and the second part, a country like UAE and how are they trade partner. I'll choose Saudi Arabia as an example in the Gulf, mainly because there are several overlapping complementarity with other countries. So what I mentioned before for the Saudi Arabia, it can be used essentially for UAE. China is still an important partner with the UAE, and the partnership is a comprehensive strategic partnership. It's not only related to oil, but Abu Dhabi is looking at Chinese investment in the area. Pre-COVID-19, tourism was quite important, finance, but then still 5G, ICT, satellite and space program are in between. Now, a good question, have to see, and I don't have an answer because we are talking on something that just happened the 13th of this month, is how the relationship between UAE, Israel, and the United States are going to change the relationship with China. Is the normalization of the UAE diplomatic relation with Israel a game changer? Because most, again, of the media report has been looking at this triangular relation in opposition to Iran. But definitely, in my opinion, there is also a Chinese angle in which the US can try to increase the UAE unwillingness to cooperate, economically speaking, with the People's Republic of China. So UAE already realized this early on a shift in the security arena and in the security architecture, but then have to balance the fact that security is provided by the US and economic is in China's hand. So UAE still is a very important partner and still have to look at maintaining maritime security, even with US rebalancing of its own forces. And from the security part, one of the questions now is that UAE is looking to acquire the F-35S from the United States, and Israel, even if it's normalizing the relation, is not willing, at least on paper, to accept this kind of weapon sale in order to keep a military age in the region. So definitely, if we're still looking at trade, China is the main partner, and there are not going to be a different or big change in the future. But in my personal opinion, the role, the next battle will not be played in the transfer of military hardware, but it will be played on the digital iron curtain that is slowly descending in the area. And it will be a binary choice to choose Huawei, to choose Chinese 5G and communication technology, or avoiding doing that. And there are countries like UAE that still have an option to do it, countries like Iran that have definitely less option. And I hope that I understand and answer properly your question.
Thank you. I actually find that rather interesting what you're talking about now, Alex, on the whole issue of the digital platform and where that will play out. You know, I think you cannot ignore the fact that all these countries, Saudi Arabia, even Qatar, the UAE, you know, particularly Israel, in many ways they are caught between the dynamic between China and the US, you know, and I think that really is you know, it is a balancing act that they have to manage, but so do the Chinese in wanting to go into the region, you know.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, can I see if there's anyone else who would like to ask a question?
Maybe when there are some questions that are being still in process, I can little bit talk for a couple of minutes on what you just mentioned, Michelle.
Yeah, yeah.
This is an important part. COVID-19 underlined weakness in economic model, especially in the movement of goods between countries. We all realize that our economy, global economy, is not a linear economy, it's a nodal economy. And COVID-19 blocked several nodes, increasing problematic distribution of goods. The digital part is growing, it's very important. I mean, today we are the living example of it, because today's lesson is not live, is online. So the cyber part, not only in terms of cybersecurity, but in terms of e-commerce and about advancement in technology, AI and big data, I'm not going to say is going to be the future, is the future. And who controls the data flow and the data analysis is going to control the majority of the new economy. And in this fight, US and China are progressing quite fast in development quantum computer. But the most important part is to find regions that are going to willingly accept one technology instead of the other. So you're going to have more big data and an exponential amount of data. A few years ago, I don't remember correctly, it was 2016 or 2015, the amount of data generated by sensor, it was the same amount of data generated by humankind in all history. So this is the trend. And whoever controls this data flow is going to control the future of the economy. And having said that, it's quite important because the BRI, especially in the Middle East, is evolving toward the so-called digital Silk Road. in which connection is not only highway, is not only port, but it's also connectivity by fiber optic. And who is going to control the fiber optic definitely is going to edge not only an economic advantage, but also an information advantage, and at the end, a military security advantage.
But I cannot see how the Chinese can actually best the Americans on that front, you know, because I don't see that the Americans are going to be any less engaged in the region, whether it is militarily or economically. And technologically, they are far ahead, you know. I mean, if you look at all the analysis about China, it has a long way to go to catch up with the US, you know. So, I mean, apart from Iran, you know, I don't see that any of the others would, you know, would naturally pick China over the US, you know. And there is the security element, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree with the security element is extremely important. But then again, we have seen a balancing act that is related to a rising economic power and a security power balancer that is the United States. And the United States, especially with President Trump, but it already started with President Obama, was already pivoting to the East in terms of security. I don't agree with some theory that the US is going to abandon or leave the Middle East. That's not going to happen. US have important military base there in Bahrain, in Qatar. But basically, US is moving to its former role of offshore security provider. So it will be there, it will be a guarantor, but it's not going to have the boot of the ground footprint that it has already now. China is not going overnight to insert in the security vacuum that is being left by the United States, but China, especially in a post-COVID economic crisis, has still some mean to operate in the region and to make the economic choice of the Middle East state quite compelled in avoiding friction, not only with the United States, but with Beijing also.
Agree. We've got a question. Someone has asked, China is now in a position where its strategic rival, the United States, is effectively the security guarantor of its energy supply lines. How long can a country that seeks power with another tolerate this situation?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. We have to look at the fact that in the last more than 10 years, China has been accused in being a free rider of the United States security umbrella, not only in the sea lane and the freedom of navigation, that it's a public good that was supported by the US, but also in other areas. And in this respect, I mentioned, for example, Afghanistan. China is increasing the People Liberation Army Navy capacity in operating in blue water, in the area that are strategic to China energy security interests. Specifically in the Middle East, I'm talking about the Gulf of Aden, the Canal of Suez, and Bab al-Mandeb. And then, as we are here in Singapore, Malacca Strait also is another choke point. China is increasing this capacity, and for the first time opened a military base outside its border in Djibouti. Djibouti, geographically speaking, is in the African continent, but Djibouti, Somalia, Sudan, Eritrea have a strong cultural connection, affinity between the Horn of Africa and the Middle East. So basically being in Djibouti is also overlooking at the other side, that is Yemen. China has not been a strong, it didn't participate actively in the Yemen conflict. It's always appealed to the United Nations. Even in Yemen, if I recall, when there was the unification between South Yemen and North Yemen, it didn't oppose at the time the rise of Saleh to the fact that even in the South, it was a Marxist group that was operating. In Yemen, China is not very active. It left to the Saudi, UAE, and the other Gulf monarchy to provide the security part. But on the other side of the Horn of Africa in Djibouti, he started to be more proactive, especially participating to the international peacekeeping operation against Somali pirates. That's quite important. China, with a caveat, China participated in the operation, what was not complemented together with the other navy. It operated alone, and it was also providing security to the commercial, non-Chinese commercial vessels that were moving all together with the military escort. Djibouti is the first military base, but this is a trend. There is another base that is in Tajikistan, and this underlines the importance of Central Asia and connecting Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East together.
Okay, we've got a question from one of our colleagues. Asif has a question. Asif, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Alex, my question to you is something that I have been thinking for quite some time. In 2003, Xi Jinping assumed power in China. And in 2013, he assumed power. And in the same year, he propounded the idea of Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative. Whereas this Silk Road we have been hearing for about 2000 years. So my question to you is, because again, this Belt and Road Initiative, China has been talking in terms of far ahead future. So how much is this initiative linked with the personality of Xi Jinping? And in terms of looking into future, what could we think about the future of this initiative after his reign is over? Thank you so much.
Dr. Schuster, thank you very much for your question. Now you are asking me basically to glaze at the crystal ball. Before doing that, let's look at 2013. President Xi Jinping started his term in 2012. And in 2013, when he was visiting Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan and talking with President Nazarbayev, he expressed the vision of the Eurasia economic belt. Later on, during the same year, when he moved to Indonesia, he then analyzed and expressed the vision of the 21st century maritime Silk Road. It was quite a long title that a couple of years later was streamlined in OBOR, One Belt, One Road. But then at the time, they realized that there were more than one belt, and the belt was on the land, and more than one road, and the road was on the sea. So at the end, it arrived in 2015, 2016, with the definition of the new Silk Road. Silk Road have been there for a really long time, and Interact, I see the goods moving from China to Europe at the time, but it was a completely different set. Why I say this? First and foremost, the name Silk Road arrived just a few hundred years ago by a German geographer. At the time, yes, they were selling silk, but most importantly, they were selling spice, they were selling porcelain, moving in caravanserai in areas that are now Central Asia, Bukhara, Samarkand, and so on. But the biggest difference at the time was in one point. There was a need from one side, and there was an offer of goods from the other side. This time, China not only have the goods, but have the capital to pay for the need. And this is, in my personal opinion, one of the big difference, because the Belt and Road can provide financing for attracting Chinese investment project, and is the Belt and Road an important part of President Xi Jinping foreign policy? The answer, this can be very straightforward. Yes, it's President Xi Jinping flagship foreign policy. In this respect, even if China is going to have a bigger problem, economical problem due to COVID-19, the trust that the Belt and Road is having is going to be there, but there will be a selection process in where the investment are going to be located. And this selection process not only started now, thanks to COVID-19, but it's already started a few years ago when Beijing was calling for investment that can have a return, not just investment that are going to lose money or to just create friction with the local government. So having said that, you're going to witness the expansion of the Belt and Road, not only in pure trade and investment term, in promoting connectivity, but also in the digital side, and with COVID-19 in the new so-called Health Silk Road. Having said that, there is an increasing number of friction with the local investment. As I mentioned before, there is a quite big differentiation in the perception of what China wants and what China can give for the country that receive Chinese capital. Also Chinese worker, because most of the time the money is just moving from Beijing Investment Bank, Exim Bank, PBOC and so on to state-owned enterprises. And also there is a question if there are even other enterprises from China that are private, where the state part finish and when the private one start, because we are always talking about capitalism with Chinese characteristic. And it definitely is not something that we are used, and when I mean we, I mean the West. And with this, I hope to have briefly addressed your question. Glazing about the crystal ball in the future of the Belt and Road, then again, it's very difficult to say, especially now with COVID-19, but then again, it's still part of the Chinese policy, foreign policy of banking diplomacy or investment economic diplomacy. And this is playing well in several areas in the Middle East, especially to the fact that it is not going to pretend a change of the status quo if the country receives Chinese money. But don't forget that this money is not a free string attached money.
Great, thank you. Okay, there's another question that was asked, and it revolves around this whole issue of technology, yeah? And the question of 5G. Is technology the next great power battlefield in the Middle East? The GCC has embarked on a transformation project at which digitization is a major part. 5G is central to this effort. But will the Clean Network Initiative force the Gulf nations to choose between China, embodied by Huawei, and the US?
Yes, this is already happening, this friction. We just look at the number of foreign visits that Mr. Pompeo did in the last month in the Middle East. That's quite important. And basically it was an out in saying with us or against us. But then all the countries that could take time and still looking at possible alternative or having it at the same time. As I mentioned before, Iran has less chance to make this choice, but if you look at other areas that are outside the Middle East, especially the African continent, what are the choice? If not cheap technology and this kind in Africa, mobile phone, the most of mobile phones are not even from Huawei, are for a very not known in the West Chinese provider who produce that in Ethiopia. And basically they have all the characteristics that they are needed there. So 5G can be in that area quite an issue, and there'll be many choices. Staying in the Middle East and North Africa, there is a lot of still maneuverability that countries have in choosing. Countries that have less maneuverability, for example, are in Europe compared to the Middle East, while the United Kingdom just not long ago is looking at having a balanced approach in having Huawei supplying just a part of that needed networking technology, but recently say no to everything. And other countries like Italy, for example, after the visit of Pompeo, just decided for the moment to avoid using Chinese product. Middle East is still there, is still in the balance. And we don't have to forget one thing, that with Chinese technology also come a very important technology, software and camera facial recognition. That China is the world leading provider in CCTV camera and security software. software that, thanks to big data, enable to have not only more efficient counterterrorism policy, but also a more strict and efficient and in some way economical control of the local population. And that's something that definitely in the Gulf and even in North Africa have its own appeal.
Okay, we have a few questions. Let me just ask one of them first for you. This is from Jason, but I'm not sure where he's from because he's not identified himself. What are your views on China getting involved in resolving diplomatic issues between Qatar and the other Gulf members as a strategic advancement in this region on an economic front?
Again, Jason, thank you for the question. While I mentioned the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and UAE, some of the insights that I've been talking to are the same and can be applied to Qatar. But when the GCC country started to have a friction between Qatar, Saudi, and UAE, again, China didn't take part. But you can see some subtle line in between the relationship between Beijing and Doha and Beijing and Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. And this is the fact that China has a strategic partnership with Qatar and a comprehensive strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia and UAE. That is a level above the one with Qatar. And this also can be read as a signal to the fact that, if I don't recall the year exactly, it was 2016 or 2017, there was a joint letter in support of China handling of Xinjiang. And Qatar was with UAE and Saudi Arabia signing the letter, but retired the approval of the letter on. So probably this was also a signal from China in the relationship with Qatar. On the other side, the relationship that Qatar had at the beginning with the Muslim Brotherhood and the support of the Muslim Brotherhood created some increasing friction with the People's Republic of China. But at the moment, still the economic relationship between the two countries are still there. And surprisingly, Qatar showcased a very strong resilience in opposing to the diplomatic, let's call it diplomatic blockade from the other neighboring countries.
I find that your comment about Qatar and the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood and the fact that this would not be something the Chinese would be comfortable with actually brings me to a much broader question, because the Chinese government has an issue with the Uyghurs, and I'm wondering how this would play out in its efforts to sort of engage or be more of a presence in the Middle East, because surely there will be groups within these regions, and not necessarily the government, or at least not publicly, but I'm sure that there will be opinion groups or various groups, public opinion, that would have issue with its treatment of this group, of this particular group of people. How are the Chinese going to manage that? If I can ask, I'm not asking you to crystal ball, but I'm sure that it is something that they have taken into consideration. You can't just simply argue that it's an internal issue and it's none of your business. You know what I mean?
No,
because
definitely.
This is about religion. You know what I mean?
On this respect, the answer from the Middle East is quite representative of one fact. Who is the most vocal in terms of country in Arab country, not Arab country, Muslim country with majority of Muslim population on this respect, on the security issue inside the autonomous province of Xinjiang, is Turkey, is not Saudi Arabia. Saudi still has this prominence in global Islam, but Saudi Arabia, UAE, never opposed or showcased officially any kind of critique of what China, of how China was handling the issue of Uyghur in Xinjiang. And having said that, if I recall correct, there was an interview of Mohammed bin Salman during his state visit in Beijing in 2019, and the interview was published by Xinhua, mentioning that the prince, the crown prince, said that China has all the right to take the appropriate counter-terrorism and de-extremism measure in, let's say, safeguard his national security. And that was the official message from Saudi Arabia, and that's a message that reverberated in all the area. Why Turkey is jumping in, mostly for geopolitical reason, but also to the fact that the Uyghur, it's a Turkic language minority that have cultural link in the region with the area. And surprisingly, there are not much rising voice from other areas outside the Middle East, and I'm referring to Central Asia, because in Xinjiang, in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan, you still have an overlapping of minority in that area that are not only Uyghur, but are from Xinjiang, but are Kazakh, and in even a minor part are Tajik or Uzbek or Kyrgyz. So getting back to your question, up to now, the vocal part from the Middle East on this issue is not there.
Okay. Jason, you had asked 3 questions, but I don't quite understand your second question. So I don't know if you want to actually unmute and ask Alex the question directly, because I'm not quite clear what you're asking him about. Hello? Okay. He doesn't seem to be responding. Are there any other questions? Okay, James, you have the floor. James, you have the floor.
Hi. So,
Hi. Okay, we can hear you now.
good. I wanted to make a comment rather than a question, if I may, on the Uyghur issue. And 2 things. One is the issues that are friction between Qatar and China are much more structural when it comes to the Uyghurs. Qatar is the only Gulf state that is an autocracy, but actually says that it promotes things like human rights. It's also the only Gulf state that has a political asylum law, which last year became an issue when it was an Uyghur stranded at Doha airport that the Qataris initially wanted to return to China, but then arranged for a 3rd country to go to. The other point I want to make in terms of public opinion in the Gulf with regard, or in the Middle East, certainly with regard to the Uyghurs, is as autocratic as Gulf states may be, they listen very carefully to what the public mood is. And the public mood in with regard to the Uyghurs is not one of concern. In fact, if you go back to prior to the pandemic, Muslim tourists to Xinjiang were on the increase, despite what was going on there. What the driver in terms of the Muslim world is going to be, if there is a driver in a switch on public attitudes towards the Uyghur issue, it's going to be in countries where there is an anti-Chinese sentiment. And then I probably think we would be looking more at Central Asia. And if that were to take on any significance, that would put Middle Eastern states under pressure. Thank you.
Dr. Dorsey, thank you very much for your comment. You give me the line to promote my next lecture that is at the end of this series, that is talk about Central Asia. So I will comment on that on the next talk. Let me take from where you ended. Gulf crisis. During the Gulf crisis, yes, there was more structural issue between Qatar and China in relationship to the Muslim Brotherhood, but we don't have to forget that at the time, and even now, as I mentioned before, China was balancing between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and none of the two countries is in a position to force China in taking a side. This is the same, it can be applied to the GCC struggle, internal struggle. While the BRI appeals to all parties, the economic investment and promise made by the BRI plays both well in Qatar, in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and nobody is questioning China or asking China to take a stance between one side or the other side. But if we want to look at quite interesting, let's say, perception of China and the Middle East is the fact that China has started since the inception of the GCC to try to have a free trade agreement with the GCC country. The free trade agreement also has been stopped by one issue, taxation of petrochemical product. Beside this issue, during Xi Jinping, after President Xi Jinping visit in the Middle East, from 2016 to 2017, there was a perception that the FTA, the free trade agreement, was almost there. And the Chinese were adamant just few days of the start of the problem between Qatar and Saudi Arabia that FTA was going on. So basically it tells us that they were totally unaware of what was going to happen in terms of the GCC internal confrontation. And of course now after 2017, the whole FTA agreement idea is out of the picture. But then this, with Qatar especially, created other dynamic. In Qatar, with the need to be his own security provider, and China already earlier, previous to this confrontation, if I recall correct, was in 2014, started to sell short-range ballistic missile to Qatar. And after that, Qatar have to shift all its airlines that were no more able to cross in Saudi airspace to Iranian airspace. And it can tell you already something about the shift. The problem, Qatar, Saudi Arabia has been always there. There was, let's say, a kind of simmering tension due to a power asymmetry between the two countries. And at the end, to the fact that probably Saudi and UAE, they were counting more on the action from the United States, this simmering tension just surfaced with the result that we all see now.
Great, thank you. Okay, there was this very interesting question, and it's probably going to be the last question because we're coming close to the end of the session. Let me read it out to you and then you can answer. I thought this was a very good question. You noted that the US-Saudi alliance is based on interests, not values, whereas the Sino-Saudi relationship is also interest-based, but the values gap is not as pronounced. The China model of a strong state focused on economic development and political repression is very attractive to many Middle East countries, Saudi included. Do you think that this lends the Sino-Saudi relationship an advantage over the US-Saudi one, in that China and Saudi can work together on several issues that democratic US cannot, at least to the same degree?
That's a great question. I agree.
There's a long answer you'll have to give now.
I agree on both relationships are not based on core value. But the problem with the United States is that there are less, let's say with China, there are less problems. So the Chinese relation with Saudi is less confrontational. There is no need to change of the status quo. There is no need to discuss how the Saudi Arabia manage its own internal affair. For example, we are looking now still at a quite close relationship between Washington and Riyadh, thanks to the fact that there are personal relationship between the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Trump. But then in November, if there is going to be a change in the leadership in the United States, this kind of direct connection are going to be missing, and then a lot of questions are going to arise in the relationship between US and Saudi Arabia, starting with human rights, with the assassination of the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, and so on. With China, I cannot say that the relationship is easier, but definitely the relationship is less complicated. When you have a relationship that is just based in economic interest, this relationship can shift very fast, changing with economic. At the moment, still, there is this synergy between Saudi Arabia and China, and synergy from oil, from investment, from the Saudi Vision 2030, that overlap pretty well with the Belt and Road Initiative, and still to some kind of support that the Saudi can give to China in terms of their positioning as a prominent, let's say, as Saudi prominence in global Islam. Having said that, if there is a small change in this economic relationship, then all the overall relationship is going to change quite abruptly. And we don't have to forget that prior to the energy interest that China started to have in the Middle East in early 90s, the relationship between China and the Gulf country was mediocre at best. There were no value, no economical interest, no economic entanglement. But now, in the near future, the Sino-Saudi digital cooperation, it's going to be quite interesting to see if it's progressing, how this is going to mark the future relationship, foreign relationship between the two countries. And this, of course, is going to be a friction point between China and the US, and between Saudi Arabia and the US. But as I said before, several times, Gulf monarchy and other countries that have relationship with the United States used China as a bargaining chip. If you are not selling me the latest unmanned combat drone, then we are going to ask China to sell it. And it's not just the case now. Just if you remember what I mentioned during the Iraq and Iran war, when Saudi Arabia was perceiving that Scud missile from both sides could be a threat, a security issue, start to acquire Chinese Dongfang missile. Qatar in 2014, when it started to perceive that Saudi is not going to be a security actor supporting Qatar, started to increase its hardware import, military hardware import from China. And again, we are talking about missile, this time short-range ballistic missile. So Riyadh is hedging its position considering the US security rebalancing and US interest in the region, that's for sure. How long, how far this honeymoon with China is going to go, it depends on so many factors that is not possible to foresee for a long term a kind of scenario, but definitely at the moment the balancing act from economic and security is from both sides, from the Saudi and from the Chinese. And we are going to see what is going to happen if there is a change in November in the United States and in the relation between the United States and Iran. And then it will affect how China, Saudi Arabia, and all the Middle East security architecture is going to be reframed and changed. And I hope I have answered this question.
Yeah, I think you have. You know, it's been a good discussion, and let me just make a few points before we conclude. First of all, join me in thanking Dr. Alessandro Arduino for a very interesting session and some very interesting perspectives about the Chinese role in the Middle East region. I personally did not know that there was quite a long history before that, and it's a 20th century sort of relationship. I found that very interesting because it does put a different perspective and a different color to China's presence in this part in the Middle East. I think we also set the tone nicely for next week's session, which will actually look at the US in the region? That is always the big $64,000 question. You know, and as Alex has pointed out, there's been much debate about the US withdrawing from the Middle East, and that isn't the case. I mean, I agree with him that they are not, but what they are doing is reverting to being the offshore balancer. So I ask you all to join us next week, same time, for our Middle East 101 sessions, where we take a look at the other big external player, which is the United States. I thank you all for your time and the very good questions, and we will see you all next week. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Bye.